Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in Bratislava. And I'm here to talk about the limits of design. At heart, we're architects and always will be architects, and the activities that we assemble around us are ways of expanding that activity. We've been involved in many significant projects and unusual projects around the world. And those are the projects that have driven forth our research into different fields. I'll be taking you through the Millau Viaduct in France, the Apple campus in Cupertino, and the Gherkin in London. But I realize after the previous speakers today, we're all talking around the same thing. The work sharing spaces in many ways resemble our own environment at Foster's, and I will show you that. So the Millau project was a project that had been defeated by politicians and road engineers for years. It was not just the feasibility of it, but the political and economic dimensions. The project was stalled because the conservationists objected to bridging over one of France's greatest beauty spots. And the residents of Millau objected to it because the people who were stuck in traffic jams in Millau when there was no bridge would no longer be spending their money in the town. But the result satisfied everyone. The structure is of tremendous beauty, an enhancement to the valley. And most tourists stopped having crossed the bridge and turned down into the village to take photographs of the bridge, and also to have a pint of beer while they were there. So the project was famous in our office for having one person working for 1 year on one detail. And this is just one example of the extent and the detail to which we can go on some projects. So the barrier on the edge of the highway not only had to prevent vehicles falling into the valley, it had to prevent disruption by violent winds, it had to be easy to maintain and to replace, and crucially, it had to allow the travelers to the south of France to enjoy the magnificent views over the valley to one or other side. The Apple campus in Cupertino is coming to completion later this year, and it was the brainchild of Norman Foster in conjunction with Steve Jobs to unify dispersed premises around Los Angeles in a single location, a single circular structure which is more than 350 meters in diameter, and which breaks new boundaries in terms of technology and manufacture. So the facades are all curved, but it has the largest pieces of glass ever manufactured by a company in Germany, AGC, and they're 18 meters long, 3.5 meters high, and double glazed and curved. So we're always pushing, and now that AGC has that plant sitting in southern Germany, there will be other projects that will follow this, and it's great to be at the front end of this. We're also involved in many of the Apple stores around the world, which are tremendous attractors, and they also push the boundaries of the possible. They're all different, and each one we have to come up with a separate design for. But in each one of them, we have our own internal specialists of engineers, of obviously architects, of lighting designers, and also crucially, particularly in the Apple stores, pushing forward the possibilities of making structural things in glass. And just reverting briefly to the Apple headquarters, there's a structure there for the events like this, which is the largest self-supporting glass building in the world. So we have a huge canopy supported purely on curved glass walls. So moving on, in the late 1990s, we embarked on the construction of the Gherkin in London. And that broke new ground insofar as there had been no high-rise buildings in London for 25 years. It was the aftermath of a backlash against modern architecture, and there was a huge exercise in persuasion for the authorities and also the public. We always, on significant projects, engaged in an outreach to persuade people that it's the right thing to do. So not only did it create a beautiful profile, a completely unique profile on London's skyline, it was innovative in terms of being fully naturally ventilated within a double facade, and also aerodynamically, the circular form allowed for the minimum of disruption at ground level. So one of the problems with tall buildings is they create tremendous turbulence in the air, and this very sleek aerodynamic volume, as I'm sure Michele will confirm, allowed for a much smoother and more pleasant ground floor environment. But also to create a magnificent space on the top of the building. So there are restaurants, and this is a cafe where you can have your morning coffee. Where's the workplace man? But it's creating a lot of different environments in an innovative building was one way that we managed to break new territory. And it was the first of a new generation of towers which have sprouted all over central London. So we've assembled a diverse team of collaborators in our studio in London. Surrounding an architect, there are any number of different specialists, and they jump between disciplines as well. And going back to the workplace analogy, I sort of realized during the talks here today that this has existed, this kind of cross-fertilization of ideas and disciplines has existed in our office for many years. But the number and extent of specialisms increases. And what's wonderful is we're architects at heart, and we assemble a team which corresponds to the specific nature of the project. And what's comforting as an architect myself is there's always a role for us, because someone has to pull all those amazing ideas together and provide a direction. So we've started to think very carefully about the 5 senses and how they influence our experience of the built environment. And again, I appreciate from today's talks that other people are on the same lines. So the spaces we create are vitally important to your sense of well-being. And your vision is your most important sense. It's 10 times more sensitive than touch, and it's 100 times more sensitive than smell. So we work with our own film recording studio, our own less elegant robots, and also a combination of three-dimensional modeling and software which works back to the environmental modeling of buildings. And here's, again, a much cruder version of your robot offering our senior partner a drink. The neurologists, to take one example of this, are able to track your location and track your perception of space. And again, I was fascinated by the discussion of one of the devices at the back of the room, of where your sense of attention and age, all these things are now possible. So we'd like to have a conversation afterwards. So this is a model of a journey from our office across the bridge in the Thames to the King's Road, and we were able to measure during that walk how stimulated people were by their environment. So the journey to the King's Road, the shops on the corner are the red, and that's where the excitement was. The mind drifted a bit on the way back and along the quieter streets around the corner. So everything and everybody is on the move. This is a tracking of the 21st century's Silk Road from Asia to Europe. And we have to ask questions about this. Do we really need the number of containers that travel? And how do we optimize the transportation systems within our cities? And this is a subject that we've worked on in our own home turf for many years. 300 years ago, London had 80,000 inhabitants. Even at this size, the city had traffic problems, and you can see here an early attempt to cross over a busy London street in the early 19th century. Also, different problems, massive quantities of manure. How does a city cope with that? Our problems are different, but they recur. Now it's a city of 8 million, in other words, 100 times as many. And you ask the question in another 300 years, 800 million? I think not. London consumes a ton of carbon per inhabitant per year. It's a very dense city, and in contrast to other cities around the world, to take an example, Houston in the US, it's quite efficient. So Houston is 25 tons per inhabitant per year. European cities have a great advantage of their historical density. And also the post-war planning of London allowed a green circle of landscape around it, which is still preserved, and allows the city and its inhabitants to breathe. So in many ways, the city is getting things right. This is a road to work along a pedestrian bridge that we designed a few years back. And we also push out quite a lot of polemical projects. This is an idea which may or may not catch on, and I'll show you some that have in the past, which is that cycling is now the fastest growing mode of transport in London. It's the idea of a cycle superhighway to be built above the railways. So the railway lines will no longer be just railway lines. There'll be cycle routes, IT and energy superhighways, and also a green lung, a green corridor along the lines of the High Line in New York, to repair the damage of the scars when they were built 100 years ago. So last year we were, a small team in our office, were approached by Nissan to look at the garage of the future for electric cars. And they had a fascinating series of exchanges and eventually came to the realization that you don't need a recharging station so much as a network. And the idea that we came up with was that in the curb of the sidewalk, there would be a resource, a cable resource, which would allow a magnetic recharging of cars overnight, in much the way that you get the magnetic recharging of your Apple Watch. So the cars would be parked on the roadside. They take the charging at nighttime when there is a surplus of energy from the generation system, and can be used in the daytime, or can recharge the system. So the energy can be pushed back into the system at peak hours for office use, which is the day, and evenings for residential use, which is the night. But also, what's fascinating about the whole development of electric cars, which, as we all know, is moving at high speed, is issues of air pollution and noise pollution will disappear. You will be able to open the window. Now, in Bratislava, it's a wonderful small city where natural ventilation is the norm, but where we live, it's kind of noisy and smelly, and the idea of that becoming the norm is exciting indeed, and reclaiming the very scarred nature of our cities will be wonderful. So this is a map tracking flights over London. There are 4, this is another polemical project of ours. There are 4 major airports and 6 runways, and over 3,000 flights per day. However, those of you, I'm sure, who know, have flown to London, is many of those aircraft fly straight over the city, which is dangerous and polluting. And this was an idea to build a brand new airport in the Thames estuary, which would have many dimensions to it. It would have 4 runways. The aircraft would approach over the sea and therefore avoid the disruption. But not just that. It would become a transport hub connecting with the Eurostar railway to Europe. There would be a new Thames barrage, which would, to prevent flooding of the city from high tides in the North Sea. The barrage in itself would become a bridge for railways and roadways, and would connect with the transportation port on the north banks of the Thames. So it would be a story about air, road, rail, and the sea. And this project became very close to being adopted. It was the hobby horse of Boris Johnson when he was Mayor of London, and may yet come to the surface. But for the moment, we're stuck with smelly old Heathrow. 20 years ago, we embarked on a project to tame Trafalgar Square. So at that time, it had become a glorified traffic island, with only a few brave tourists and some pigeons going to the middle. And we talked to over 100 separate public bodies about changing and improving that, not least the cab drivers who were bitterly opposed to any schemes to reduce traffic. But now we have reclaimed the space for the public, and that does that by the simple gesture of channeling all the traffic along one side and unifying the space with the National Gallery, so that it's become a much more widely used space. But not only that, it's what lay behind the congestion charge. So the idea of restricting travel in central London has become an idea which is adopted in London and now in other cities around the globe. And also, it was a pioneering project for Bill Hillier and his space syntax crew at University College London, which is now a widely accepted method of modeling how public space and internal space of buildings could be used. So the spin-offs from this project, as in many of these projects, have been significant. And just to give you an idea of how far the change has moved, in the borough of Camden in London now, all new office buildings are allowed no spaces of car parking. The only spaces of car parking that you're allowed there is for disabled people. So the balance, only a few years ago, and in some European cities, the requirement was the reverse, a minimum amount of car parking for office buildings, and now that has completely reversed itself. A similar project in the Vieux-Port of Marseille a few years back. Again, a very historic port going back to Roman times, but ruined by traffic jams around the edge of it. So our project not only involved drastically reducing the road surface and giving that back to the public, but also creating what the brief called for was a fisherman's market. And we turned this into something with many more dimensions. It's become a sun shelter on a hot Mediterranean day. It's become a space to go and look at yourself in its completely flat, mirrored soffit. It's also become the major space in Marseille public space, which again brings us to the question of what the human interaction and the sense of well-being might be. Some natural light might be good, some home comforts, but probably not Star Trek. I think the simple things, plants, pets, photos, textures, color, music, a good book to read. And I think this touches on where design is heading, going back to what Philip was saying earlier, that places have to have a character and a sense of well-being in them. So we wondered if this could inform the current portfolio of works. So thank you very much. That's a brief summary of how far we can take design.
Hugh Stewart Foster and Partners. Samozrejme, aj teraz čakáme na vaše otázky, takže ak máte aplikáciu Slido otvorenú, nech sa páči, napíšte ich, hneď sa k ním dostaneme. We'll get the questions right away. We already got something, but first maybe something from me. You think, and you kind of mentioned it and touched it from one side, that really the architecture nowadays, it's not about just the building, the structure, but also about the feeling that gives to people who are working inside that structure, but also go and walk around it. Yep.
Yes.
Is that the future?
Oh, completely, yes. Yeah. So gone are the days when we create kind of antiseptic white boxes. I think people are looking for a character, a stimulation in the space they work in. That's not to say you don't want clarity. I think architectural clarity, for us as a practice, certainly is an important dimension to it. But there's another dimension that goes beyond that, and I think that's what where the current generation is heading. Where I think the public no longer expect to be spoon-fed in their tastes and by the design professions. The design professions have to provide what's wanted.
Okay, let's get a few questions from you guys. Is it real to think of London as a cycling city?
I think increasingly, yes. It's true that Berlin 25 years ago was, and cities in Holland were much more advanced in terms of their cycling infrastructure. But in recent years, a significant number of cycling superhighways at street level have been constructed and are this in the last year or two coming into use, and that's increasing. And it's what is also observable is it's the fastest growing form of transport.
What is your form of transport to office back in London?
I'm a cyclist.
Cyclist,
yeah. A fair weather cyclist.
Okay, so you know bad weather.
Yes.
The Londoners don't used to. Some of them. Shorts all year round. Which project you worked on so far is your favorite and why?
I have a museum project on site in the southwest of France, which is a real pleasure. It introduces a completely different scale, spatial considerations, and we're also pushing at the boundaries of technology in quite a simple way. We're using a very well-developed form of earth wall construction there, which keeps the building cool in summer and warm in winter. It moves well away from the architectural cliches of curtain walling. It's an absolute pleasure. Yeah.
How does it work in Foster and Partners? You get assigned one project and the team works on it and then moves to another one, or it's all about interaction between people in the office?
It's a continual process of day-to-day management of resources. Sometimes clients don't make a decision like that, in which case you have to get on with something else. If all the projects were handed to me on a plate, I would be delighted, but unfortunately we have to get out there and hustle. We have to get our own projects. Partners like myself spend a lot of our time going around, pursuing leads, pursuing new projects all over the world.
But also as a partner, you oversee a variety of projects. It's like you're now working on an office building in Warsaw.
Yes.
Then you completed a concert hall in France.
Yep.
So there are a variety of use.
Yes. So we kind of take quite an old-fashioned view to that, which is that a fresh pair of eyes at a problem often produces interesting solutions. So people are not pigeonholed in our organization as the office expert or the housing expert. You're at liberty to pursue completely new building types. And of course it means a lot more work because you have to absorb all the specialist knowledge that a particular field is. I'm pursuing a hospital project, which I've never done before. But it does mean that you can take a fresh approach to things, and you can challenge existing wisdom on projects.
Okay, one more question from you. How to reduce car traffic in the city with growing suburbs and no underground like Bratislava? Is reducing parking way to real solution?
I think reducing parking goes straight to the nub of the problem. In some cities around the world, people are too fond of their cars, that they view using public transport as in some way second best and beneath them. What the experience of London over the last 30 years has been, where there has been a severe and now total restriction on car parking in new developments, is that 95% of people travel on public transport. So there is no stigma attached to public transport, and therefore the transportation systems are enhanced, and it's a virtuous circle.
Okay, I think we are way far away from the Londoners, as we are used to drive our cars everywhere and constantly, as we lack underground or the good connections.
You get on a tram.
We can get on a tram, yeah. It's like a viewing of the city forever. Anyway, do we have more questions? You can raise your hands if you're just about to ask something and you don't want to write it. If not, thank you very much for being here and for being a last speaker of talks.
Great pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Hugh Stewart from Foster & Partners.